Hi guys, it's good to see you guys in class once again, and I am very glad we are all in class. And we would be, as I made mention of previously, we would be talking about CSS Grid, and CSS Grid is also a major CSS layout. And yes, that's what we will be looking at. And I have so let me just start with my slide, which is what we will be looking at today. And I'll just give a raw down introduction and we will start practicing. So CSS Grid, what is CSS Grid? CSS Grid is a two-dimensional layout system which allows to create complex web design, responsive web design with rows and columns, unlike Flexbox, which is just one-dimensional. As you can know for Flexbox, which is just one-dimensional, that means they are just side by side. So you just have to tweak them here and there before it could fit what you want, basically. So for CSS Grid, it is multi-dimensional. So you can use it in different type of dimensions, spanning it from one end to another. And before now, if you wanted to make use of that, we have to be using floats and the likes. But with CSS Grid, it has made it much more easier. So I'm sure you will have seen some galleries. Let's use we know our, I don't know if we have older generations in the house, but those of us in Nigeria home, we know once when we were growing up, we have something like a photo album. And if you look into a photo album, you will see that not all pictures are always the same. There are some that are small, there are some that are landscape, there are some that are horizontal. They are just in different forms and shapes. They're just in different forms and shapes. So that is how CSS Grid basically. And as we'll be going on into this class, we would also be looking at something called, we'll be building this, design. We'll be building this design to allow us to understand how CSS Grid works basically. But before now, we just have to practice. So this is how CSS Grid, this is the power of what CSS Grid can do for us. But I will just give some brief explanation and before we go into it. But the end goal of this class is that we'll be able to build this design. So let's continue. So what are the main properties of CSS Grid? We have the flex contain, like we have a flex box, we have the grid, which we define the grid on its own, which are going to use to define the layout system, which is CSS Grid. Then we have the grid templates column, which is specific to define the number of columns and their sizes. We have this grid template row, which specifies the number of rows and their sizes. We also have grid gap, which is used to define margins and paddings around. So this line, the spaces you can see around these grid elements are used by gaps. We use gap to define that. So instead of using margin and padding, margin top, we just use a grid gap and it gives a gap around it. So the next one is, what are the advantage of CSS Grid? CSS Grid is like I made mention of earlier, it's a two-dimensional layout system. It allows us to create both rows and column management and makes it more powerful than Flexbox. So when you are trying to design complex layout system, it helps us with that basically. And for us to be able to do that, we just have to be detailed enough, and we have to understand some things, probably because then I mentioned you have to use something such as floats, moving your elements all around, which makes it quite difficult. But with CSS Grid, it is very, very, it is very, very easy to use, basically. And you would see that as we go on. So also, for for another thing is another advantage of CSS Grid is responsive design. Like I made mention of it in just like in Flexbox, it's also very easy for you to have a responsive design. Basically, for responsive design, it's very, very easy for you to have responsive design with CSS Grid, and that's one of the major components of Flexbox and CSS Grid. Okay, it also, and one of the last component, one of the other advantages of it is simplify complex layout systems, such as you can use a news block, for example. You would see that there is more like a big header and there are spaces beside it, and there are different kind of news right there. And there are different kind of layout system, just like a newspaper layout system. Just pick a newspaper, for example, and check on how it looks like, and you will see that, okay, trying to build that kind of complex design, you have to, if you are using Flexbox, you have to just do display flex. You give your right container something called a width of probably, let's say, 500 pixels to be wider than the other small box. Then you now go down also again. You now start doing some tweaks here and there, and it will be time consuming. But with the power of Flexbox, with the power of CSS Grid, it's very, very easy to do. So why use CSS Grid? So one of the major reasons of using CSS Grid is simply to use for complex design, and it's ideal for multi-column layout design and designing complex grid-based system. It's also, if you need precise control over placement of elements, is CSS Grid. If you want to have a precise control, okay, you want to place this element on the right, on the left, and also make it more reasonable and more precise, you would actually see that. So without much further ado, I feel there is less talking there's less talking about it, but when you see it in practical, it is much more better. So I have a simple CSS, a simple HTML, which I'm just going to use to practice here. Let me just create my style.css. So I would just link this properly. I'll just link this properly to my test.html. So let me just do my style.css right here. Link, rel, that's going to be style sheet, and I'm going to have href, which is going to be dot slash style.css. So as you have also now, I've told you, this is not a good approach, but since we are just practicing, I will just do this. So let me go live so we can see simply what we have. We can just see we have 1, 2, 3. And let me check if our CSS is properly connected very well. So let me close this. Let me close all this so I don't have multiple tabs open. So let me just write background color. I have dot body, which is going to be not dot body, just body, which is going to be, let me use a background color of red, and let's save and see what we have. Fine, our CSS grid is connected properly. I'm just going to write some minor CSS style like you have known before, such as our global reset. So I'm just going to have margin of 0, padding of 0. So going forward in next class, some of these things, I'm just going to have it pre-written before the class. So we just go into the main topic we have for the day. Sorry, guys, are we understanding what I'm talking about? Am I making sense?
Yeah.
Yes,
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 sir.
we understand.
All right. So going forward, going to the next class or any class I'm going to be having practical. I know every class you're going to be having practical sessions, but I won't be coming into the class to start writing all this. I'll have written it beforehand, and that's how it's going to be. So let me just style up about the elements. So I have like pre-style written down. Imagine 5 rem, 5 5 em 0 0 So I'm also going to have padding of 0. Padding of 0. So I've written this down on my notes. So this is not basically what we are working with. So I'm just trying to have a pretty simple style right here. That's 1.6. I have word spacing. So all these are not necessary. Word spacing, which is just 1.4 pixels. So these are some styles that font family. I'm going to use Roboto because in my HTML, I have Roboto right there. Roboto and sans serif. So the next one is going to be color. I'm going to have ash 0f 172a. No. 0f 172a. So I'm also going to have a background color. A background color of ash f1, f5, f9. I'm also going to have, that's all. So on my HTML, which is my test.html, I have more like a container. I have a container right here. I have a container, which is simply what I'm just going to style. So I have container, I have dot container. Container, I have a width of 80%. I also have a margin of 0 or 2. I also have a border of 10 pixel solid hash 0 f. Is it 0? I'm coming out to see something. 0f21, yeah, 21e, and that's all. And the next one I have is going to start my element dot item. So I have an item right here. I have item, so I have a double class of item. So I have item. So I have a padding of 0.5 em. So when we get into responsive design, you understand all this very well, all these measurements very well. So I have color, background color of ash FB7185. I also have a font weight of 700. So it's just normal font dash weight of 700. And I have a color of ash F1, F5, F9. So, and I also have a border of 1 pixel, no, 10 pixel, 10 pixel solid, and I have hash E11, E48. So this is basically what we have, and let's see our design. So this is simply what we have, and this is just the normal structure of our HTML. This is just the normal structure of our HTML that we are going to be working with, and from here we would now go into working with understanding Flex CSS Grid in itself. So as I mentioned previously, grid is horizontal and vertical, and I can place something on the right and on the left, which is horizontal axis, and on the left axis, but that's just what we have. And let's go into our CSS, and we would now start fully. So the first thing we have to do is I'm just going to do our first thing to be display grid. Sorry, I am saying flexbox because it's kind of intertwined. So display grid, and once we check our display grid, you can see that we have nothing. So you can see that we have nothing right there, and it's not saying anything. It's not actually reflecting. But by the time we define a grid template column, there's something called grid template row and grid template column. It simply tells you the size that you want your elements to be in. So I'm going to have something called, and I'm going to also show you different ways of doing this. I have grid template column, and I also have grid template rows. So I have for my grid template columns, I'm going to have 100 pixel, 100 pixel, 100 pixel, 100 pixel. So I'm going to have 6 columns: 100 pixel, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 100 pixel, 6. So once I save this, let me comment this out. And if we check our browser, we'll see that we have automatically 6 columns. This is simply what we have there, automatically 6 columns right here. But we can't see that now. So wait, I'm coming. So before we get into this, let me just comment out this element of 4. So this was added later on. So you can see that we have this, and when we want to define the rows, I just have the same thing for my rows and my columns. So I just copy this and I paste it right here. So I paste this here, and it gives us a big size of what we want. So we have what I simply defined here was I want to have 6 columns. I want to have 6 different columns across my element, which is each box are going to be are going to occupy 100 pixels. So each of these boxes, so let's check our Google console. You will see that each of those boxes are simply 100 pixels. So if we check, you can see each of those boxes are 100 pixels. If we check the size, they are 100 pixel in size. So that's 9.9.9. So they are 100 pixel each in size. So you can see each one of them has the same size. And that's how you define your CSS, your grid. So it depends on the number of sizes you want. But this is, as you go on, I will show you different ways on how we do that. But this is just one approach on how to do it. So at this point, if we are to toggle this properly, we would see that we have 6 column grid. My elements are supposed to have installed an element which is I'm supposed to have installed a CSS grid line extension, but I'm trying to do that here. But so you can see, so I've done that now. So I've done this, so we can see that it's giving us the number of columns that we have. As you can see, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we simply have 7 columns. We have 6 columns actually, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We have 6 columns and we have 7 rows. That is simply what we are working with right here. And let me reduce this. Let me reduce the size because let me just reduce this size. I didn't give it a size, but why is it? Okay, I gave it a width of 80 pixels. Let me just give it 50% and see the size that we have. Don't worry, I'm going to talk about the biggest part later on. I'm going to talk about the big part. The big part is just like extra space that is right there. It's just like an extra space that is right there. So the major thing about CSS Grid is how you can span elements from one end to another. So I want element 1, which is this one right here, should have an extended version, while every other one keeps the size that they want. As I mentioned in our in our photo album, that I mentioned that one picture might be bigger than each other. So this is simply how that is done with CSS Grid. I just come to my item and I do item 1, item -1. So that's item -1, and I give it a grid It's something called grid row start. Grid row start. This is how you define elements on how they are going to be spanning. So we have grid row start, which is this. We have grid row end, grid dash row end, which is the starting point of where this element is going to start from. So this one element is going to start from one, and where is it going to end? So we have vertical, which is vertical is up to down, and row is left to right. I hope that thing actually do confuse me when I'm saying vertical and horizontal. It do confuse me a bit, but I have one analogy in my head. When you say someone, this is the analogy I use most of the time. If I want to insult someone, but it's not an insult. If I want to say someone is short, instead of me saying someone is short, I just say someone is vertically disadvantaged. So that has actually registered in my mind, that knowing that when I say when something is vertical, it means up to down. And when I say something is horizontal, it means left to right. So that can actually help you also to defining which is what is different between vertical and horizontal, basically. I used to define between what is vertical and horizontal. So yeah, rows and columns are actually a lot to deal with. Rows and columns are actually a lot to deal with. So that's it. So, but with that analogy I have given you, it should be easy. It should be easy to understand. So when I say something is vertical and another one is horizontal, you just know I am saying vertical is straight, vertical is straight, and columns, vertical is straight and horizontal is left to right. So parallel. So it confuses everybody, but there's nobody that I still get confused and I use it. So I say the row ends at 3. So what this simply means is when it starts at 1, it ends at 3. It ends right here. And I say that once the column, so I'm going to do grid row, that's going to be grid column start. Grid column start, so you start at 1 and end at grid column end. Grid column end. Grid column end, it ends at 5. So what I simply mean by this is it should start at this point. So this is column 1. It is starting at column 1, and it's starting at this position 1 and it's ending at, that is the row. The row is occupying the left axis from 1 to the end, 1 to line 3. It occupies that three rows. And for the column, it takes from 1 to 5. As you can see on my end here, if you can see my screen properly, you would see I have 1, column 2, column 3, column 4, column 5. I'm telling it to occupy from column 1 to column 5. And I'm saying that you should occupy from row 1 to row 3. Do we understand? Is it confusing? Joshua, I don't understand. Why is it 2 and 4 instead of 3 and 5? I don't understand. Joshua, I don't understand what you're saying.
No, I meant like the boxes, they were 4 and 2 instead of 3 and 5.
Where are you saying 3 and 5?
No, like you gave it row 5 and row 3 and 3 rows, but I'm seeing only 2 boxes, like from up to down, and only 4 boxes from right to left. So it was confusing at first, but I understand what you said now.
With my explanation, do you understand now?
Yes, I understand.
Okay, so I know it's going to be quite confusing. So that's why I said there are different kind of approaches to this, basically. There are different kind of approaches. This is just one approach. So when I say grid row start, so this is row 1, where you can see line 1, where my mouse is. This is row 1, row 2, and row 3. So I tell it, okay, occupy the row from row 1 to row 3. So it's going to pick the first row, the second row, and the third row. It's going to pick that box, the two boxes. So there's like an invisible line. If you can see the invisible line I have here, but you can see that my screen basically is divided into 6, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I have row 1, row 2, row 3, row 4, row 5. So this is it. This is my first row. This is my second row. This is my third row. This is my fourth row. This is my fifth row. And this is my sixth row. So when I say occupy from row 1 to row 3, it did what? You occupy from 1, 2, 3, and stopped on line 3. That's basically what it did. When I say occupy from column 1 to column 5, it simply did what? You occupy from column 1, column 2, column 3, column 4, and it ended at column 5 on that particular line. That is where it ended. So do we understand? Felicita, is it quite clear? Yes, it's going to pick the line, not the box. It picks the line, and CSS Grid actually picks the line. So if I say something like, no, it does not pick the box, it's actually the line that it picks. So if I say column grid row end at 4, grid row end at 4, it's going to pick one. It's going to pick line 1, line 2, line 3, and line 4. It's actually not picking the boxes. It's actually picking the line. So the every other one, so it's actually picking the line, basically, not the actual box, because the box is the column, not the row. The box is the column itself, not the row. So this is box 1, box 2, box 3, box 4, box 5, and box 6. So this external box here is not needed to us. This external box, as you can see, there is no element inside this external box on the right-hand side. So it's actually picking the line. Do you understand? Felicita, Alex, do you understand? Do you want me to go over it again? Just go to your Google console, and once you go to your Google console, you simply do what? You would just define you come to your layouts. Once you click on your layout system, once you come to your Google developer to your console, you would see styles, computed, and layout. Once you click on layout, you would see just click on all these boxes. You can see all the boxes I clicked on. Just click on them, and it's definitely going to give you the same thing I have up here. So that is it. So just have that to make do with simply what I have. Also, just try that out basically, and you will see that you have the way my screen is. You will see the same way we have it. So another way of doing this, instead of trying to do some calculation on your own, let me comment this out. Instead of trying to do some calculation on your own, it's simply just do something called item -1, and I do grid row. I use the shortcut. So there's always a shortcut. Instead of you defining the grid start, as I made mention of margin top, padding top, margin top, margin bottom, margin left, and margin right. So if I do grid row, and I define it as this, and I do 1/1/3, and I do grid column, and I have 1/5. It's also the same thing as what I have above. It's simply telling me that, okay, I want my row to start from row 1 to row 3, and I want it to start from row 1 to row 5. Do we understand? Do you understand the simplicity of it? So instead of defining each one of them one after the other, you just use a shortcut of grid row. You define the start position and the end position. You define the grid column, you define the start and the end position. So instead of trying to define it one after the other, so I just have to teach you the multiple ways to do it. Instead of you defining it one after the other, you just use the shortcut, and you just know, okay, have it at the back of your mind that, oh, when you are working with your layouts, you simply just do what? You just have to have a picture glance of how many columns you have. So basically what you are working with is the columns that you have. So now, you as an individual, you are going to be the one to define the number of columns that you have. Your screen can be divided into different amount of columns that we have. So let me try something here and show you that I can add multiple columns to this. I can add multiple columns to what we have. So let me add additional more columns here. So you can see that I can extend our screen more. I can extend the number of columns that we have. As you can see, we have additional number of columns, which is we have 11 columns basically, but that's not what we want. I'm just showing that as a developer, you can define the number of columns that you want, basically, not having to restrict yourself. So, but basically the number of columns that I actually use is the max column I've actually used is like, I think 6. Basically, I just divided my screen into 6 different columns. So every other one, it also breaks into different lines. And this actually also helps a lot. Like I made mention in what's the name? In Flexbox, basically, when we were working with the elements that I had multiple, that I was talking about flex wrap, and I had multiple elements spanning. You can see it gave us like an horizontal line. But when we had the flex wrap, when we said flex wrap, we gave it as wrap and it broke to the next line. CSS Grid actually gives us that advantage also. Like the way we have, let me do something back here. Let me return this back here. And we have 6 column grid, and let's come to our elements here, and I just decided to have multiple elements that are more than 6. You would see that it would automatically break. It would automatically break at every particular point in time. So this is not what I want, because this is, so let me have 4, 5, 6, 6, 7, 8, and 9. So as you can see, it's giving us automatic, is actually breaking into Henry, just calm down. I know CSS Grid can be quite confusing from the beginning. So let me remove all this. Let me go back to our CSS Grid. Let me remove what I have right here. Let me start all over again. I know it's going to be quite confusing. So let me start all over again. So as you can see now, you can see what I simply have on our element is right here is, let me change all this also the text so you can see it. So this is 4, this is 5, this is 6, this is 7, this is 8, this is 9. So let me save that. As you can see, what I simply defined was I want to have 6 different columns. So I have 6 different columns. I have 6 different columns, and with 6 different columns, it simply does what? Once it's automatically 6 on our, according to the row that we define, according to the columns that we defined, it simply does what? It simply does what? Gives us 6 different columns. And if I wanted to have multiple columns, like I made mention previously, but I've said based on personal preference, I most likely just divide my screen into 6 different columns, basically. And with 6 different columns that I have 9 different elements on our screen right here. 9 different elements. And once you get to number 6 column, what it simply did was, it simply automatically breaks. This gives us an advantage over defining flex wrap or no flex wrap, because with this, it simply just tells us that, it simply automatically calculates your screen size and say, I want this to just be simply six column grid, and each of the elements just fits into 6. And by the time it's already 6, you get to the last point, and this is 6. What it simply has to do is break to the next line. You don't need to write any line of code to define it to be 6 column grid. Henry, are you understanding bit by bit? Henry, it's because of you I'm actually going over this over again. Henry, are you there? Henry, go ahead and speak.
Okay, sorry, sir. Just to, because based on what I can see on your screen, you said earlier that from left to right is row, then from up to down is column. That's where
you're mixing it up. From left to right is column. From up to down is row.
Okay, now I get. Okay.
So I like I made mention to you, I might do some mistake of interchanging it, but if at any point I make that mistake, I would always refer back to it. I will always refer if I make that mistake. So from left to right is actually column. From up to down is actually row. So do you understand now, Henry?
Yes, sir. Yes, I do understand now. Okay. Thank you.
George, I'm not using an extension. It's just like a Google console stuff. So just open your Google console, go to layout. By the time you click on layout and you just tick on all these boxes, it automatically does what? It gives you what you want, and that is it. It gives you this simple design I have on my screen. It's not actually a design. So, Henry, can I go ahead? Can I just move on? Do you understand this now? Okay. All right. So let me continue what I have. Let me just comment this out. I know we still have a long way to go into this class, but regardless, we would continue. So I was talking about the span. George, there is no link for any Google extension. Just right click on your mouse and you will open your Google Developer Console. Just right click on your Google Chrome and you will see inspect. Click on inspect, and someone has given you a shortcut, which is Ctrl+Shift+I. It opens your Google Developer Console for you. And once you open it, click on layout. You would see styles, computed, and layout. Just click on layout. You would see these options. Just select them. They are automatically not selected. You have to select them yourself. So that's it. No, there's no extension. There is no link. So this is for item 1. So with item 1, I define the grid row. I define how wide I want it to be and how high I want it to be. Basically, so the first value is the starting point, and the end value is the second value is the end point. So like I said, I have starting from row 1 to row 3 and column 1 to column 5. That is simply what we want. And I'm also going to do that I'm also going to define for item 2, which is I'm also going to show you another approach to it. So it's going to be item 2, item -2. So I'm defining for the second item. And with this, I'm simply going to do grid row. And I'm going to do span -2. I'm going to do span 2. This is also something that is a simple approach to it. And for the other one, I'm going to do grid row, grid column, and I'm also going to do span 2. So what this simply means is that from whatever position you are at that current time, just span 2 columns and 2 rows. So from every particular position you are, span 2 rows and span 2 columns. If I also do the same for item 3, so let me just duplicate this. and I do for item 3, you're also going to see it's also going to span 2 rows and 2 columns. So it's spanning two columns, that is left to right, and rows up to down. So do we understand? Are we getting it? Am I making sense? Hope I'm not confusing you with the different methods I am using. Because I have to show you the different kind of approaches to it, because like I made mention of it, there is no one way to doing things. There is different kind of approaches, and I don't think I would have a specific, another dedicated time for CSS Grid. Everything, if I'm going to use it later on, I'll just be using the fastest approach that I've always been using, basically. So that's why I'm giving you the idea of the different kind of approach from the beginning. So, and when we get into the practical session that we'll be having, I'm also going to use a totally different approach so you can actually understand better. So let's continue. So let's continue. Do we have any question? So there is another approach for it. So we have, here is another approach I'm going to use that for the line 3. That's dot item dash 3. I'm also going to have grid area. I'm going to have grid area, which is going to be the simple analogy of what I'm going to do right here is grid dash start slash column dash start slash row dash end slash column dash end. So this is another approach to what I want to do. So what I simply want to do right here is define the start point for this particular, for column 3, and also the end point to say, okay, start at this particular point, okay, just occupy the total number of widths that I want it to occupy. So instead of me doing it in grid column, grid row, I just want to do it in one straight line. So this is, so let me do a Control Z and just comment this out here and give you and define it in another line so you can know, you can understand the progression. So the row start, where is it starting from? I want it to start from 3. As you can see, this element is starting from line 3 right here, which is row 3, starting from row 3. So I have 3 and I have slash. What column is it starting from? It's starting from column 1. As you can see, it's starting from column 1. So I give it column 1. Next thing is row. What row did I want it to end at? I want it to end at row 7, which is right here. I want it to end at row 7, which is the last bottom row of what I have. I want it to end at row 7, this last end. So I'm going to give it 7. And I want the column also to end at column 7. So I have this, and you will see that it's automatically going to fill the width, the total space of what we have. So do we understand this other shortcut I just did? Do you understand the shortcuts? Is it clearer? So it's just the normal approach of what I did right here of grid row and grid column and grid span, and grid column, grid row and grid column. So just use this idea of what I have on the first way I showed you guys on how to do it. Just have that, just picture that at the back of your mind. You can see I have grid row start, which is 1, and I have grid row end, the position I want it to end, which I have at this particular position of the item 1 that I have. I want it to end at 4. I also have a column start of 1, and I also want it to end at column 5. So what I have right here for item 3, I want it to span from, let me comment this out. let me say this. So I want it to span from where it is right here, to span from the beginning to the end and from the top to the bottom. So what are we doing now? You can see that the current row that we have item 3 is at column 3, is at row 3 rather, is at row 3. So I am telling it span from row 3 to the end, which is from row 3, I'm telling it to span from particular row 3 to row 7. So if you check what we have right here, you can see the last row we have right here is actually 7, as you can see. And for the column, I want it to start from column 1, which is on column 1, and I want it to span to column 7. And I want it to span to column 7. Basically, I want it to span to column 7, basically. So how do we do that? So how do we do that? So the simple way of me doing that is I give it column 3, I give it row start at 3, and I give it column start at 1. Then I give it a row end at 7 and column end at 7. So is it clear? Exactly. So is it very clear? So do we understand? I want to hear you guys respond so I would know. So I would know how to go ahead with this. I should come again. Okay. Who else want me to come again? Okay. This was just supposed to be like a short introduction of 30 minutes thereabout, but yeah, it's fine. So that's why I made mention of it, saying that you don't have to follow. That's why I'm giving you different. That's why I have given you different kind of approaches. You don't have to follow one simple approach, saying that this is the way I want to go through. You don't have to follow through and see it as what you want. So just pick any pattern that is much easier for you and go with it. That is what I would say. So, but let's continue. So, and another thing I want you to know is that instead of you defining, let me comment this out. Let's check out what we have on right here. As you can see, instead of you defining 7, you can see we also have something called -1. So your last column or your last row, you can also define it as something called -1. Let's do -1. It automatically translates to the last one. So we have -1 also here. It automatically translates to the last one. And as you can see, we have the same thing. Since we have 6 properties on the screen, and that is how that works. I hope we understand, and I am not just speaking into the air. I know I can. It pays me to just stay on the explanation and go into the practical session by Wednesday, but I have to go into another topic on Wednesday. But I'll find a way to work with it. So I'm also going to do the same for every other one. so that we can, so I actually want to do something. I actually want to bring these two, to place it in the center. And in CSS Grid, that gives us another flexibility basically. And it makes it very easy for us to do things. But if it was previously if it's in other approaches, we like to use something called we actually want to use something called positioning, absolute and relative before we can bring it to the center. But with CSS Grid, it makes our work very easy. So I'm not just going to comment this out. I'm just going to comment this out, and I'm going to redefine it. So I'm going to have dot item -2, and I'm going to have grid -area, and I'm going to have 2. What this stands for is from where you are, basically. Just let me write this and I will explain. /2 /4 to 4. That means start from row 2, start from column 4, end at row 4, and end at column 6. So this is simply what I have. So as you can see, I brought it to the center right here. I brought this right here to the center. And what I'm simply going to do is I'm going to use something called a z-index. I think someone spoke about to place an element above another element. What you simply have to do is just use a z-index and it's going to pop up differently. So as you can see, I have brought our 2 to the center. It's more as if it is placed above each and every of those elements. So, and we also do the same for our element 1. So we want our element 1 to span across behind the element. So it's just going to be like, that's going to be like more like a simple design. And so that we don't have this space. We don't have this space opened up right here. So what I'm just going to do is the column end, I'm just going to have 1 to 7. And as you can see, it's automatically going to span from beginning to the end, and just going to be as if we simply placed number 2 above each and every element. And we actually placed the item number 2 element above every other element, as you can see on my screen. So do we understand how you can work with this? I think this is the first time I'm also mentioning z-index. This is the first time I'm actually mentioning z-index. And yeah, it's also something there are some things I might not mention, I might not have like a note for, but as I go on, I would simply explain that. So do we understand? So do we understand? So one thing I want you to know now is, if at any particular point in time, I now had a new element, to our HTML, and I have like this row 4, and I span it right here and I define it. What this is simply going to do is it's automatically going to create another row below it, simply because we didn't define what comfort. What do you want me to explain again? What do you want me to explain again? I've said a lot of things. Okay, the positioning of box 2. So what I simply did right here was, I want to place box 2. I want to place box 2 at the center point of our element. So I wanted to place it above every other element. So I simply used the approach of 2, 4, 4. I simply used the approach of grid area, what I simply did was, let me explain this properly. What I simply did was, I told it to start at where it currently is. So let me revert back right here. Let me revert back. Let me do a Control Z. Let me do a Control Z as. Let me do a Control Z, and you can see where it is currently. You can see this is where it is currently. So I simply just said, now I'm going to do a control. I'm just going to copy this out. I'm just going to cut this out basically. I'm just going to comment it out. So I said dot item -2, and I said grid area, grid-area, take from 2 to 4, that is, start from position 2 and start from column 4, basically, where that's the current position that it is currently, and end your row at column 4 and end at row 6. So this is simply what I have. And oh, sorry, I have to comment out this 4. Let me comment out this 4. Let me comment out this one. So bring it directly to the center. So what I simply did was, you start at row 2, which is right here, and end at row 4. And end at row 4, which is from start at row 2, end at row 4, and start at column 4 and end at column 6, which is what I gave it to do. That's the condition I gave it to simply align it. And it has actually done that. So what I simply want to do is make it pop up, because there are some styles. It's simply behind. If you look at it properly, very well, it's simply behind. It is above 1, but it is simply behind 3. That is why you can't see the other size of column 2. So what I simply did was to place an element above each other in CSS. You simply do something called z-index. And when you give it a z-index of 9, or you give it a z of 99999, if you give it a z-index of 999, it's actually going to pop up. It's actually, once you just give it a z-index of either 1 or any z-index, is actually going to come above every other one, basically. So any z-index of 1, 1000, 999, but most times it's just like a standard practice that when you are given a z-index, you just use like a very large number, something like 9999999. You know that even if you are going to write any number, if you are going to give a z-index somewhere else again, for that part, they are not going to conflict. So it's just like a standard practice. So your z-index can be 1, it can be 5, or anything, basically. So as you can see, it has actually popped up and is placed above 1 and is also placed above 3. So I'm now going to come to number 1, because there is an additional space opened here, and I don't want that to be. What I'm simply going to do is I'm just going to add 7. So it will span from column 1 to column 7. So once I save this, we go right here. As you can see, it automatically spans that element. So do we understand? Comfort, do you understand now? All right. So everyone, are we clear? Eric, Alan, Bell, I know whose hand is raised. Henry, go ahead. Go ahead and speak, Henry.
Okay, sorry for bringing you back. Somewhere along the line, I got logged out when you were talking about span, so I didn't get that part, but other part is clear.
Well, I can't go over span again. You probably just have to watch the video again. Just go back to the next. Yeah, because I have a lot of things to talk about. I still have a lot of things to talk about. So just do that. The video is always available. Comfort. I made mention of something that all these pixel, RAM, EM, I would discuss them in depth when we get to responsive design, because I want you to know the difference between, if I bring them in up here now, you won't really understand because I'm not going to talk about it in depth. So I want us to actually talk about it when we get into responsive design, because that will give you a better perspective into it, basically. So let's continue. So I also want to add another element to our HTML, and as you can see, we have added another HTML right here. And what it simply did was, it simply created another column at the bottom. What it simply did was, it simply created another column at the bottom, and with the column we created at the bottom, we can see he added a different column entirely, which is beyond what we have. So if we wanted to auto-fill what we have, so the next thing we just have to do is, on our container elements, what we simply just have to do is, we have to define an auto container. So we just do a grid dash auto rows. So just 100 pixel. So it gives it, so if there is, like, beyond what we have defined, if there is something more, if we have defined what we have currently, you are working with an API, and when you are thinking that, oh, I have defined all my columns and all my rows properly, but something is still coming up which you didn't define for, this is actually going to help. And one thing you just have to, and that is it. So once I save this, you would see that it's still right there, but by the time I define a column to it, I do a grid auto flow. So what position is it going to flow to? Grid auto flow. So I want it to flow to the column, and it's automatically going to flow to the so I don't want it to come under. I don't want any, if any grid is automatically going to form when I am defining something. After I've defined all my grid, all my template columns and all my template rows, if it has defined, so what do I want it to do? The next thing I just want it to do is, instead of you creating a simple column below it, don't create a simple column below it. Create it beside it. Let it always come beside. So if at any point in time we are having another element, let me come right to our HTML right here, and I define another one, and I save this, and I save it right here, you would see it's actually going to come to the side. And if at any point in time they are filled up also again, so let me just fill it up, you will see that it's automatically going to fall to the side. It's not going to create a new row. It's not going to create a new row for me, but it's also it's going to be creating more columns, basically. That is it right there. So, and that is it. And I now want to teach you another approach, which is, instead of defining, let me just comment all this out. So instead of you defining elements as this, let me comment everything we have right here. Let me comment everything out. So let me comment everything out so we don't confuse ourselves. Let me comment this also. And so I'm going to do a call of commenting out so we can continue. So there's also another simpler approach. Instead of you defining 100 pixel, 100 pixel, 100 pixel, 100 pixel here and there, you would actually confuse yourself. There is nothing like, well, auto rows most times is just for you to, it's, yeah, into your Gochuku, it automatically define the row. You don't need to define auto row. It comes as a row automatically, basically. Why is the width of the new grid item not the same? Because I didn't define a width for it. Basically. As you can see, for every one I defined, there was like a width. They were width I defined. Actually, you can see the rows and the column is actually 100%, 100 pixel, basically. I didn't say 100%, 100 pixel, basically. So, but for that particular one, I didn't define it. So it's actually going to just occupy the space of the element, basically. Well, so let's continue. Let's continue. So I said I want to give you a simpler approach to all this. So instead of defining all this, so I'm just going to comment this out. So instead of you defining grid templates column 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So what you simply just have to do is you just do grid template column. And I will tell you, I use this a lot. You just do something called 1FR, 1FR, 1FR. So this is like fractional unit. What this simply does is give you one fractional, it gives you everything to one fractional unit, basically. So I think I have done something that has taken out all our colors, basically. So I don't have to comment that out. So what I have to comment out is this. Let's have to comment this out, and so let's save this. So you can see that once I did 1FR, 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 what it simply did was it gave us equal size. What this 1FR simply means is give me 3 equal columns across. So if I do 1FR for 2, it's simply going to give me 2 equal columns for every element that I have, basically. So let me do a control Z. If I have 1FR, 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 it's going to give me 6. It's going to give me 1, 2, 3, 4. It's going to give me 6 equal columns. And you can see it has 6 equal columns, basically. So, but since we have 3 column grid, I want just 3 columns. This is the faster approach. Instead of you defining 100 pixel, 100 pixel, 100 pixel from beginning to the end, it's Alan, I can see that the more I bring up new things that you use, your loyalty is switching over time. Why is your loyalty switching, Alan? Alan, unmute your mic, let us talk. Why is your loyalty switching, Alan? You like soft life.
Yes, I don't like stress.
Yeah, so that is, but everything are all easy, are actually good to know, basically. Because what if you get into a code base that is different from what you know? If you get into a code base that is different from what you know, basically, it's actually going to confuse you. That is why I have to. You're not going to be the one to build your whole product from scratch every time. There are going to be different. If you get into an organization, you can't say because this is what you are doing. You can't say this is what you know. That is simply what you are going to use. You just have to be flexible. So it's good to have your knowledge of everything. So that's actually good, but I just have to teach you everything. So let's continue. And I'm giving you the 1FR, and so it's just going to give you fractional unit of audio available space of what we have on the screen. So you don't have to start defining the pixel, the width, and the like. So with 1FR, it just divides your screen into 3 automatically. So, but if you want that, okay, you want one to be bigger than each other, you can simply just do something called, if you want the one to be bigger than every other one, you can just do 1FR5. And with this, it's actually going to be bigger than every other one. So the first and the second one are going to be big, while yes, that's simply what it does. The 1FR takes up, it divides everything equal space. But when you do a 5FR, if you give one an higher fractional unit, it's going to occupy more space than what we have. Basically, that's simply it. So that's another simple approach to how you can do it. So if you have If peradventure you want your middle element to be bigger than every other one, you just do it like this. And once you're working with responsiveness, this also helps you when you're working with responsive design, basically. So, and yeah, that's that. So there's also something called let's say, let me also use the repeat function. So I'm going to use grid template rows, and I'm going to have the repeat, which is going to be, no, I'm not supposed to put it in. So it's going to be repeat, and I'm just going to be true 100 pixel. So what this simply does is give me two equal rows of 100 pixels. So each of the rows are 100 pixels. So, and I can also use this for my column also. I just have repeat. I have 3,1 FR, and it simply gives me 3 equal columns. No, I said two, I said 3, not 2, 1 FR. So this gives me 3 equal columns across my screen. So instead of me doing 1 FR, 1 FR, 1 FR, I just do repeat 3, 1 FR. And if I want to do this, if I do 4, 1 FR, it's simply going to give me 4 equal spaces, 4 equal columns, basically. So do we understand? Front. Henry, which one is front? I don't understand what you mean by front. So this is just like another simpler approach. Instead of you defining 1 FR, 1 FR, 1 FR, you just use the repeat function, and it gives you the space in between. It automatically calculates it for you, and you are good to go. So the calculation of doing 1 FR, 1 FR, 1 FR is off your head already. So, and like I made mention of gap, I'm just going to do something called grid gap, grid dash gap, which is going to be, let me just give it 5 rem to give it a space between all our elements. As you can see, there are spaces in between already. So 5 rem is too much. Let me give it 1 rem. So it's simply going to give it a simple space. As you can, before I gave it a gap, there were no spaces between them. So instead of me start now going to each one of the items and start giving them a margin to the left, margin to the right, and the likes, so I just give it a gap, a grid gap, and I can just use gap for short. And it automatically gives me the space in between. So across the row and across the column is actually going to give me those spaces. Do we understand? Do we understand? Are we getting it? Are we getting it? Hope I'm not convinced. Hope I'm not confusing you, but I'm giving you more approach to doing things. Hope I am not confusing you. I am giving you flexible approaches.
Okay. I'm confused.
George, where are you confused? George, where are you confused? George, where are you confused?
I said the 1 FR is it sharing the space?
I've not seen the document, sir.
That container sharing the
George,
space.
your background is noisy. I can't hear you. So probably you just have to type it in the chat box. So let's continue. So I'm also going to do this. So this, we are done with this already. So I also want to give you another new approach to things. Yeah, Henry, I would say that this is nothing short of truth. You you would front end, there are some things you would do on the front end that will make you look, that would try to test your patience, but you just have to be calm. I have used this over and over again. That is why I am calm to use it. Basically, most of the time I use grid when I'm building probably a simple layout here and there. I use grid a lot. I use grid, so I don't fidget because I understand what I am doing, basically. Because I simply understand what I'm doing. That's why I don't fidget using it. But it gets to some point, like you can see at some point I was making mistake between vertical, horizontal rows and column, but I just had to calm down and control myself to understand it better. So the 1FR is sharing the width. It's sharing the width in the container, not the height. It's not, yes, George, it is not sharing the height. If you want to give it the height, you are going to be the one to define the height, but it's just going to share it. The width is going to define. Okay, if you have 3 boxes and you want it to have equal spaces, you want it to have equal size across. So it's going to divide it. It's going to divide your three divs across your elements. That's simply what it's going to do, not on the width, on the height, but across the width, not the height. Take note of that. Don't confuse yourself. I think probably that's where you're confused. So I'm simply going to do something right. So let me bring back this our div. So let me bring back this our div so I can show you something different again. Let's continue. So let's continue. So I'm going to comment this out. So I'm going to comment this out so you can always make reference to it. So I'm just going to define like a grid template column, and I'm going to give it 1FR, 3FR. So I just need 2 column grid, and I want a grid template row of 100 pixel, 300 pixel, 100 pixel. So once I save this, this gives me what I want. It gives me what I want. This gives me what I want. And let me now show you another thing, which is I have a grid template area. So with my grid template area, I can give each and every one of these different elements across board. And yeah. Do we have any question? Let me take question for the next 5 minutes. So let me take question for the next 5 minutes. Let me take question for the next 5 minutes. Okay, Kelvin, go ahead and speak.
Okay, sir. Yeah, I just got confused, probably because of the network please. On the grid template rows, you declared three measurements around the 100, 300, and 100 px. But checking the interface, I only saw that it occupied just 2. Just what is it called? Okay, sorry about that. I fully understand now.
Okay, you have gotten it, Abi?
Yeah, yes sir.
Okay, very good, thank you. So does anyone have any other question? I'm taking question for the next 5 minutes, like we're on a short break. I've been talking for like 1 hour, 25 minutes thereabout. So okay, George, go ahead.
Okay, sir, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
PAR, right?
So now the one you did now, there's 4 div inside the container, right?
There are actually just 3 divs inside the container. There are 4 divs
Okay,
inside the
3.
container. No, there are four
So you
divs in the
have
container.
All other pages, just
4,
There are
yes.
four
And
divs.
the one FR is for 1 FR and 3 FR. I think that's for the 1 FR is for 1 and 3, while the 3 is for 2 and how will I explain it? 2 and 4.
So yes, it's for 2 and 4.
Yes.
Yes.
So those pixels now, there's 100, 300, and 100.
Yes. That is the row. That's the row. So you can see that. So for the first one, you can see the first one is 100. The second one
Yes.
is 300. And the last one below it is 100.
Okay, the height.
Yes.
Okay.
So you can see that the height I gave to the first row is 100. Can you
100.
mute your mic, George? Can you mute your? There's a baby crying in your background. There is an height of, I gave it an height of, the first one I gave it an height of 100. I gave the second one an height of 300. And I gave the last one a height of 100, basically. So, do you understand now, George? What
Yes, sir.
authenticated? All right.
Yes, I understand.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. That's good. So, I have 3 minutes left to answer questions. So, does anyone have any question? Do we have any? Okay, let me check if the chat box if I have any question. Well, Flexbox can actually do all this, but you would have to write multiple lines of code. Like, okay, now for Flex, you will have to start doing something called Flex row on each of those items. But with one line of code, you have basically done everything you want to do. But I want you to know that this does not invalidate the position of Flexbox. It does not invalidate the position of Flexbox, basically. You can still use Flexbox and CSS Grid together. You can still use Flexbox and CSS Grid basically together. That's it. That's actually it. So so does anyone have any other question before I continue? Okay, Comfort. What in the case where columns of the first item are 2FR and 1FR, but the next two items are 1FR? How are they? I'm trying to understand what your question is, basically. I'm trying to understand. You're saying what in a case whereby the column of the first two items are 2FR and 1FR, but the next item are 1FR and 2FR. Okay, so you have something like this. You have 2FR, 1FR. So the next one you have to have 1FR, 2FR. Is this what you mean, Comfort? I'm trying to understand your question.
Um,
Basically.
so let me use the example of your screen.
Okay.
Okay, the first two items, one, the first box is showing, I think is 1FR, then the next box is showing 3FR. Then how do I make it in a way that the default box is having one FR.
You want it to make it that the fourth box is having one FR.
One FR. That's the switch places.
So you want this particular one to have 2 FR, and you have this one to have 1 FR. So you want, so based on your explanation, the first one, that is box 1, it should have 2 FR. Box 2 should have 1 FR. Box 3 should have 2 FR. And box 4 should have 1 FR. Is that what you mean?
No, sir. That's box one has two FR.
Yes.
Then
As it
box
is
two
now,
has one FR. Then box 3 and 4 should be under box 1 and 2.
box 3 and 4 should be under box 1 and 2. Then you just, simply what you have to do
Yes.
is, you
The
just do
box 3
this.
having one FR and then
So this is it. You just do 1 and 2. You just give it 1 FR, just give it 2 FR, 1 FR. That's just it. You don't need to define the 4 columns, basically. If you want it to just be, if you
uh,
want to have 2 columns, or you want your box 3 should have 2 FR also.
I want box 3 should to have the width of box 2, and then box 4 has the width of box 1. But it should be in this set.
But they should now break, basically. So you just have 2 FR and 1 FR. That's what I did, basically. So if you can see, but it's not breaking, basically. The reason why it's not breaking is simply because you have defined audio width. You have defined audio width. You have 4 columns, you have 4 elements in your grid. So what I simply did here was position 1, div 1 has 2 FR, which is 1.3.74 pixel. As you can see, box 2 have 1 FR, which is 7.6.887 pixel, while box 3 has 2 FR, as you can see up here. Can you see my screen very well? Comfort. Can you see the measurement up here? Can you see the measurement? 2 FR of 153.74 pixel, and you can see my box 4 has 76.88 pixels. So box 2 and 4 has the same size, while box 1 and 3 has the same size. I hope you get that, Comfort.
Yes, sir.
All right. So let's continue. Let's continue. I don't think we'll be able to start our practical class today, but I would just chip in our practical class on Wednesday, and I would also go into our major topic for Friday. So let's continue. So let's continue. Yeah. Not Friday. Our next class is Wednesday, not Friday. That was the slip of tongue. So that was the slip of tongue. So basically, let's go back to what we have. And thank you very much for that comfort. So I could have explained better. So what I have previously was 1 FR and 3 FR. So I have grid template area, and I want to have, and also I'm trying to define some. This does not, you don't have to you don't have to write this, because I just like, I'm just defining some. I'm going to have main. I'm just trying to write something from my CSS into my HTML. I'm going to have so let's save this and see. I just defined my elements one after the other. I just defined the head, the header, I just give each one of them a different, and as you can see, we have the footer. So that's simply what I wanted to do. So the next thing I'm now going to do is, well, the also has actually began from the beginning. It's just that I had to take it slow, one after the other. So I'm just going to comment all this back up so that you can see, so we can work with what we have. So item 2, I'm going to bring back item 2. To bring back item 2, and so I'm sorry, why am I commenting them out finally? Not this. Let me bring back this. So I'm just going to change some of these things. So I'm just going to change some of these things. So let's see, but it's still going to be, you're still going to have some minor this thing right there, but we would figure that out. So I have dot item -4, which is going to be, sorry, I have to comment this out so it does not, so so this is simply what I want to have. I have to comment this out. Sorry, I don't want you guys to lose this. Probably when you're watching the next video. So I'm just going to comment this out. So I'm just going to retype it, because I know by the time I comment it out, you might probably lose it. So once you're seeing it above your screen, probably when you're watching the recording, you would understand it more. So I have item dash dot item m-1. That's going to be a grid area of header. So this is another way, and I think I'm actually going to use this approach in our practical session. I'm actually going to use this approach in our practical session, and I have two. I have main, and I have dot item -3, and I have grid area, and I have aside, and for this I have footer. So this is automatically going to foot what we have. So there is an issue right here with my definition. So that's why that looks as if it's different. So there's a space there. So I just defined all our elements one after the other. So this is the header, this is the main, this is the aside, this is the footer. So let's continue. So this is simply how we just position elements directly in. This is just like, I think I'll talk more about this when we are actually using, I missed a semicolon in a line of code. Where is that? Okay, well, it honestly does not matter. It honestly does not matter, actually. What actually matters is the semicolon, basically. I'm not using a compiler. It's probably when I'm using a compiler that I have to So, and we can just change this here and there. So like we can just switch 3 and we have 1, and yeah, that just reverses what we have and we are good to go. So I think with this, I've been able to establish the concept of okay, I think there is just one thing for me to do is using the justify column, justify content, and the likes so that I would explain that. And basically, that is all. That's simply the basics about, let's say, that's actually the basics about CSS Grid. That's simply the basics about CSS Grid. So let me just duplicate this. Let me duplicate this and let me duplicate this. And I'll just comment this out. So let me uncomment all this. Let me uncomment all this. So once I'm working on the next one, I don't have to, so you can always see it right there. And I think by the next class, I will actually push this. So by the next class, what we'll be talking about is we'll be going into GitHub in the next class. We'll be going into something called Git and GitHub in the next class. So we are back to our default position. So let me just do something small, which is going to be grid template column, which is repeat, like I made mention of this repeat before, 4, 1 FR, 1 FR, and I need to put a comma there, so don't make that mistake. So for our column, grid template row, and I need to have repeat also, which is 4, 100 pixel. So let's see what we have. So we are back to what we have previously. So I want to actually do what we have in CSS, which is justify content, justify item, end. So there are different kind of justification. So once I say justify items, and you can see I can use that. I use justify content center, justify item center. What it's simply going to do is going to bring it to the center. When I say justify content end, justify an item end is actually going to bring it to the end. So it's actually going to bring it to the end. When I say justify item start, it's actually going to bring it to the starting point, which is going to the left. So these are basic things that you can actually use in CSS, which is like Flexbox. You can use in Flexbox, and they are actually similar. Align items, and let me put a semicolon right here. A mini semicolon. So that semicolon is simply because if you have next line of code that you want to write, that's when you need a semicolon. But if you don't have a next line of code that you want to write, you don't need a semicolon. So as with this, so once I save this, it's going to bring it to the end. So those are, so this is the simple, this is just the simple way this works, and this is actually the basics of CSS Grid, basically. Well, it actually shrank because you can check the code. I actually gave it I'm now defining I'm trying to justify the items. I'm trying to justify the items properly. So despite the width I'm going to give it, it's actually going to shrink, basically. So I'm telling it that I want it to move. I'm actually changing the natural position with the justification I'm doing. I'm justifying it to the end, but the width, you can see that the width is still the same. The width is still the same, but the element inside is what is practically changing its size, basically. That is it. So I hope you understand comfort. So that's how it works. And let me just do something else again, which is going to be, let me give it a defined height. Let me define an height for it. height of, let me say, 600 pixel. And with 600 pixel, let's check what we have. You can see we have just a small container right there. And so what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to do justify content. So justify content, which is space around, and once we say it's going to give us equal space around it. So, and once I say justify content evenly, and I give it an align content, which is going to be space evenly also. So you can see it's giving us like a space around it. So no, why is this? I'm still using the 4-column grid. That's why it's not working. I should use 2. So I should use 2. And this should be 1 FR, 1, no, Control Z, 100 pixels. So this should give us like a space. You can see when I use space, it only gives us space around it properly. When I give it space around, I give it space around, and yes, it's going to give it space around each of the elements, basically. So that's how that's actually the basics of CSS grid. That's the basics of CSS grid. And when you now want to use a design, you now have to work alongside with the design that you have. So I must tell you guys, we can't start our project today because, oh, sorry. Can you guys still see my screen? So in the next class, we'll actually be doing 2 things in the next class. We'll actually be taking this practical session. We'll actually be building this in the next class. So coming to the next class, I'll have simply done what is called, I'll have written the HTML mockup, and what I'm just going to focus on in the next class is the CSS side of things, and that is it. So I hope you are able to understand the basics of CSS grid, and when we are making use of it in the practical session, we won't be confused. I hope so, but I know there are still going to be some things that might be blurry, but I am sure we would all understand it. So, do we have any question? Like I made mention of it, in the next class, we'll be using. No, the white box by the side is not a sidebar. It's like, I don't think about it about the sidebar. What I simply did with this is simply using grid. So we would explore it more in the next class. So we have just like 2 minutes to the end of the class, and I don't want us to start and we'll just be stuck halfway. And I don't want this class to span above. So the next class will be looking at 2 topics, because the next task I'm going to be giving you guys will have to submit. We'll start using GitHub instead of Code Sandbox. So we'll start using GitHub. So that's basically it. So thank you very much, guys, for today's class, and we would see on Wednesday. And if you have any question, you can always reach out. If you still have questions about your grading, your tasks, you have submitted your tasks and you have not been graded, or you made corrections, you can always reach out to me, and I would always fix it. And that's it. So thank you very much, guys. See you in the next class. Bye.